Several more spy shots at Giga Texas are showing Cybercab testing in large numbers, more than ever before. And yet again, a photo of a Cybercab with a steering wheel has Tesla investors in a big debate. Is the Cybercab actually going to also be one of the low-cost vehicles to be revealed in a few months? If not, why haven't we yet seen any signs of these low-cost vehicles? Maybe as some are suggesting, there'll be Model 3 and Y variants. We also will share a new interview with Tesla executive Lars Moravy. He talks about supply chain delays, and so might this now explain why maybe a stripped down 3 and Y could be the answer? Lots to cover here as we do a deeper dive on what we might expect. I'm really curious what you think. Let me know in the comments. And what we're going to do is go really, really deep in here, look at all the different pros and cons for this argument. Welcome, Hans. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Herbert. This is definitely quite the puzzle that we have going on here. And I don't know that we'll necessarily be able to unravel it all, but it'll be fun to look at the different possibilities.
Yeah. So let's start off with this is kicking it off again. It's always Joe Tegmeyer. He's out there creating videos, fly over drones over Giga Texas. And what he's saying now is he's seeing more and more Cybercab testing in larger numbers. Hard for me to count the actual numbers as they were constantly driving around the factory. Sometimes I saw 3 at once. His guess is at least 5, perhaps a few more. And then he shared some interesting photos. What's interesting in fourth image. So, a bunch of Cybercabs driving around Giga Texas as we've been seeing for the last 2 months, actually. But this last photo here, if you look closely, just like we've done in the previous one, you can actually see a steering wheel. So that's kicked off a number of people talking again. And the difference is that now we're in late February. And so people are still wondering, okay, maybe the Cybercab, they're going to create the low-cost vehicle might actually be the Cybercab. Omar says seeing Tesla Cybercab with a steering wheel shouldn't be that surprising. They could be using it to validate the vehicle drivetrain, FSD, and so forth. So yeah, it could just very well be something that you need to do to validate things that are happening in the car. We can't draw any conclusions about whether something like this would actually ship. But it does get me thinking about what the more affordable models will look like and why we haven't seen it anywhere. One explanation could be that the new, more affordable models look a lot like the Cybercab on the exterior. The Cybercab looks great, so this would be pretty exciting. Of course, quite a few changes would need to be made for a manually driven vehicle. You probably want seats that are closer to the front so the driver can steer, ideally 5 seats, a charge port. This new, more affordable model, starting production soon, wouldn't be a Cybercab. That would be designed as a ground-up driverless vehicle. But you could maybe have a Cybercar built on a Model Y line that shared quite a few similarities and much of the supply chain of Cybercab. This could be priced around $30,000. Lars said on Ride the Lightning that these new models are coming soon within the next few months. So yeah, I guess Omar's taking a middle of the road here. He's saying, sure, it can look like the Cybercab, but the insides won't be it. I guess there's multiple options of what can be. And then the debate started, right? If it was a stripped down Model Y, I'd imagine it wouldn't take this long for it to come to market. Which is an interesting argument, right? Because some people are saying the reason we haven't seen it is that they take the existing Model 3 and Y, you just strip it down and sell it for cheaper. Then why is it taking this long for that to come to market? And that's what Omar said. Another good point. Why would it take years to come out with a stripped down Model Y? So what's your take on all this? And of course, there's lots of other nuance we'll go through.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to figure out because Elon did say there will never be a Cybercab with steering wheel and pedals, but there's nuance to the way that he answered that question. And yes, maybe you wouldn't call it a Cybercab if it had steering wheel and pedals. Maybe to Omar's point, it would be a Cybercar instead of a Cybercab. And that type of question mark is, one of the things that people are digging into. We know from Lars's comments that, the really big challenge that they have right now, 3 and Y are, between the two of just the Y itself is the, best-selling car in the world. And so the size of that supply chain is immense. It's the biggest supply chain in the world. And so then to change anything about the Model Y, it requires that you have to do that at immense scale. And you can think of the size of this supply chain almost like momentum or inertia in physics, that it, in order to change the direction or the speed of the supply chain at this size requires a lot more force than other things. And so that's why they didn't introduce 48-volt architecture or full gigacastings for everything in the, I think in the case of the Model 3. I'm still unsure of whether or not we have full castings for the Model Y or not. I know at one point that Austin was producing Model Ys with front and rear gigacastings. Then they actually eliminated the front gigacastings and they went to rear only, and they went back to stampings for the front. Maybe they're back to full castings, but we do know that the Model 3 refresh did not have full castings. And but then also that with the 48-volt architecture comes the steer by wire capabilities. If you don't have 48 volts, you can't do steer by wire. And so they didn't implement all of these technologies into the refresh 3 and Y because it was just too many things to change at once for a supply chain of this scale. And if Cybercab is going to sell more units than the Model Y, then we have to think very carefully about how we ramp up a supply chain from nothing, essentially, to selling 1.5 times, perhaps 2 times, or even more the number of units that Model Y sells. And so I think there are two different ways that this could be done effectively. One of them is what Omar described, but the other one is actually to double down on the 3 and Y platform, but to offer that stripped down version with gigacastings and 48-volt architecture and steer by wire, to go ahead and introduce all of those technologies into only this stripped down variant of the Model Y while you ramp up that supply chain. And eventually, once the supply chain gets ramped up, you can transfer them back up into the other more expensive variants of the car. But you need a lower volume sandbox to play in to get that supply chain ramp going. And that is another option that they could do the same thing. And then additionally, one of the things that they could do, we also heard Lars talking about the Cybercab will have plastic body panels, and they'll have an integrated step where they paint the plastic body panels in the mold while they're doing the injection molding process. And you can also think of a world
Right.
where
Yeah.
they go
The 3
ahead
and Y.
and they do that for the 3 and Y as well. So the cheaper 3 and Y, they'll have way fewer features than the higher end versions of the 3 and Y. They'll have plastic body panels instead of metal body panels. They won't have paint. You'll only be able to get them in 1 or 2 colors. You won't be able to get them in a variety of colors. But they will have castings. They will have definitely a smaller LFP battery pack. And they will have 48-volt architecture and steer by wire, which will be lighter. It will be cheaper. Ultimately, it might be a little bit more expensive as they're getting the ramp going. But once they get to full volume, all of those things, the plastic body panels, 48-volt architecture, steer by wire, and castings would reduce the cogs. And so you really could sell the 3 and Y. Like just those things alone will help reduce your cogs on your 3 and Y. Then if you decontent, if you have simpler seats that are not heated and cooled, you don't have the infotainment center in the rear, you don't have any of the special lighting, your sound system is way more stripped down. Like all of these extra things, you really can get to a point where you've dramatically reduced the cogs on that stripped down 3 and Y, and you can sell it. And another thing is, it's kind of nice to have higher volume of these larger format cars as you're rolling out your cybercabs, because then you can reserve the 2-seater for the cybercab. But when you do need to have robotaxis that are larger, these stripped down 3 and Y cars actually really work very well. And you could even, imagine a version that has no steering, like a stripped down 3 and Y that has no steering wheel and pedals either, that are 4-seater vehicles. As we, really get into the ramp of the Cybercab. And so that's just a whole nother option that Tesla could pursue, in whether they went that route or whether they went the route of having a cyber car with maybe 4 seats, steering wheel and pedals. Either one of those offers them the ability to really start ramping up the supply chain for all those extra components. But the thing that I like about the 3Y version compared to the 2-door Cybercab version personally is that I think that the demand for a cyber car with a steering wheel and pedals would be way larger than the demand for a stripped down 3Y. Now, I think there's going to be quite a bit of demand for a stripped down 3Y, but I think the demand for a cyber car would be even larger than that. And if you want to match the ramp of your supply chain with your demand closer so that you don't have super, super long wait times, then I would lean more in the direction of the 3Y. And then it also kind of reduces the risk. Like, it's not as many new things for you to do that with the 3Y as it is to go to a cyber car. And so I would probably lean 60 to 70% towards stripped down 3Y versus cyber car. But like I said, either one are completely feasible and completely possible.
It's fun. That's why I'm loving this debate. But you actually made me think of something, just blew my own mind. Like, I go, okay, maybe what they're doing, we're going to listen to Lars and what he talks about, right? He explained why the issue with the issue with the supply chain delays, and that's why they can't. Maybe what they're doing is creating a stripped down Model 3 and Model Y, but the old version of Model 3, the old version of Model Y. That's why we haven't seen them out there. And like you say, the components of that they're going to do a Cybercab, which is the body panels, makes sense. Components of it makes sense. That's, we'll see, but I can be convinced otherwise as well, because you said about the market for the cyber car. It's a drivable kind of cyber cab. It's going to be larger. But let's listen to what Lars said, because there's some hints here, I think.
I have to politely ask you here, as someone very high up in a company that literally sent an instruction manual to other manufacturers about how to do a 48-volt system. Why not do a 48-volt system on your highest volume car?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we will in time. It's like, it's not a, that we created the 48-volt supply chain for automotive with Cybertruck.
Yeah.
And some of the components, carry back and will go into our other systems. But like, again, when you're talking about that many units a week, it's a lot of supply chain to bring up, even in terms of just like, the power electronics needed to run 48 volts. And so, we are beholden at some rate to our supply base's capabilities. And like, we can bring them along kicking and screaming so fast. But, we will get all our cars to 48 volts. Cybercab's 48 volts, Cybertruck's 48 volts. I think we're trying to manage that supply chain and bring
Roadster must be, right? Because that's steer-by-wire too.
Yeah, bring the whole world with us at the same time,
Well, that brings me to S and X. So I am of the opinion, I think the Model S is probably still the best overall car in the world in terms of price, performance, range, safety, utility, you name it. The Plaid specifically, I mean, for under 100 grand, you've got a rocket ship at your fingertips. But the S and X there's a yoke option, but still no 48 volt there. We don't even have nice, fun accent lighting in the interior of S and X. So is anything coming up for S and X?
Just give it a minute.
Oops, sorry about that. I had the other video where he talks about give a minute. We'll give it some love by the end of this year, but maybe it's going to be produced sometime in the future. Okay. So he talked about 48 volt, why they did not include into the Model Y variant, or the new Model Y, because supply chain issues. And so in the same case, now that makes you think, right? That means that these new vehicles probably can't have those either. But the Cybercab will. So,
well, so the thing about ramping those supply chains is you cannot do step changes with a supply chain.
Yeah.
You need to ramp continuously and smoothly. So what you don't want to do is say, hey, on this date, we are going to be manufacturing cars 100% non 48 volts. And so we need all of the components for all of that. And then a week later, we're going to switch over and we want to make the exact same number of cars that we were making before, but we want them to be all 48 volt architecture. Like going through these, especially when you're talking, like you can do that actually if you're talking about low volume. But then if you're talking about cars that are selling millions of units a year, well, that's a whole different story. And so you need these transitionary paths where you have, like, this is why they introduced 48 volts on the Cybertruck to begin with, because Cybertruck was a much lower volume product compared to the 3 and the Y. And so they've already started to ramp up and build up this entire supply chain using the Cybertruck platform, and Cybertruck is going to continue to ramp. But now what they need is another vehicle platform that is in between where the Cybertruck sells and where the 3 and the Y and the Cybercab eventually will. So like they're saying, yes, the Cybercab is going to do these eventually. Well, you're talking about Cybertruck here and or Cybercab like way up here, and you need something in the middle as that stepping stone that can get you from where we are today to the 48 volt architecture supply chain that can support a million. I mean, ultimately, I think we're going to be talking about selling, and he said right there, eventually we're going to get all of our cars over to 48 volt architecture. So if they're selling, 2 million 3 and Y roughly a year, and then another 2 million Cybercabs a year, and then maybe 1 million between Cybertruck, SNX, Semi, maybe some other things like, well, and when I say 2 million, it'll be more than 2 million with 3Y and whatever some of these new vehicles end up being. But ultimately, you're talking about 5 million plus easily a year supply chain of 48 volt architecture systems. And right now we are in the like maybe 100,000 units per year range. And so you've got to grow that by, what is that, 50x roughly from where we are. So yeah, you need a lot more transitionary phase.
Yeah, that's why. Okay, so 48 you not likely going to introduce new technologies to these ones. To these new vehicles.
No, that's what I'm saying. If you do
you think that
the 3 and Y stripped down versions.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yes,
just the stripped down version of the 3 and Y, not going to the whole 3 and Y. That's going to sell a couple 100,000 units a year. Like add on your capacity, and so that is a good next thing. So it's going to be platform by platform, and then once you once you go and start with the, we'll just assume that we're talking about the 3 and Y. This would also include a cyber car if they did that. But if you first sell just the stripped down version with all giga castings, 48 volt architecture, and steer by wire, then you go from there back up to the performance, because that's the next lowest volume. So you do it by volume. Then you introduce those there, and then you come and you backfill from the performance back down to the entry, like the standard range, current lowest price 3 and Y.
So I think this comment from Lars really is a big hint for us of supply chain, thinking about the parts that's going to make it for these new vehicles. So there's actually 3 options, right? So we talked about, do they take the Cybercab, put a steering wheel to it, and then now you've got this one car that you're going to make in mass numbers, double down on that, and you got a drivable version and non-drivable version. I personally not quite yet leaning that direction for a lot of reasons, but that's one option. The other option is a stripped down Model 3 and Model Y. Makes sense now because of the supply chain issues. They wouldn't have the supply chain issues with these. You explained also what they might include, not include, but also, these are known vehicle shapes, and then they just strip it down, and then they can already mass produce that at big numbers if they wanted to. The third option is actually brand new vehicles. And so this is what many people thought it was, because if you read the sentence, it was supposed to be new vehicles. So Steve Mark Ryan said this, in my opinion, the next gen vehicles will be new, not stripped down 3 and Y, will be a sedan and SUV. So even like very new form factors, new segments, probably a bit smaller and will be less luxuries, and will be manufactured with many techniques, of course, from the Cybercab unbox process, but not all. And I'm expecting at least 2 models, but could be more variations over time. So that's the third potential option, which at first everybody thought that this was it, right? Because I read the sentence that said new vehicles. And then now we're all kind of like between these 3. What do you think about this option?
Well, I definitely think this was a consideration during the process. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so hard to decode all of this commentary from Tesla, is because I think they have been considering all 3 of these options as they have tried to figure out exactly what is the best strategy moving forward for them to be as efficient with CapEx as possible, to work within the constraints of their supply chain as much as possible, and to execute strategically in the way that supports an eventual shift to entirely robotaxis. So, those are the things, the constraints that they're working through and thinking about, and it makes sense that they need to consider a variety of different paths to get there. So on the entirely new vehicle, it is possible.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of low on the so you can almost say that Cybercab or Cybercar could be that. So it's not outside the realm of possibilities, but it's definitely not the way that I'm leaning based on the commentary. But Steven has a better track record of predictions on this type of thing than I do. So he's, potentially seeing something that I'm not. But I don't know what that is. And I don't know how to handicap that prediction. From where I'm standing, it looks like the least likely of the 3.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's the least likely. For them to create brand new models, it's a lot of work when you're making that transition to autonomy at this point. And then if the big argument is that if it was a brand new vehicle, like a whole new shape, we should now at this month start seeing spy shots of this out there in the wild, being tested in the cold, being tested with the FSD to make sure that it works with the new form factor. We haven't seen that. And that's why people are now saying, well, it's probably going to be the Cybercab because it's right there in front of us. We're watching it, but they just put a steering wheel on it, put gas and pedals and brakes on it, and you're good to go. I just still don't think that that's the case. And I also think about, can you imagine what would happen in branding? So you have the Cybercab and you want to hail the Cybercab. You want to be able to have this car come to you and it has a certain look and shape so you know what this is. And then if that same car is drivable, I mean, it's a small issue, but I just don't, maybe it's a different color, right? Instead of gold, it's, the one that they'll sell to use white or blue or something like that. But I still think it's going to be the stripped down Model 3s and Ys. It's low risk on Tesla's part in many ways. They've already built, they have the supply chain, they've got the build to it. But the question is, can they strip it down enough to truly get it down to the $30,000 price point? And that was the potential reason why.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to someone like Sandy Monroe, or even Brian will have a lot more insight on something like this. But I think that removing the paint, if they actually do go to plastic body panel 3 and Y, that you remove the paint shop doing that, going to castings, 48-volt architecture, and steer-by-wire easily gets you enough COG savings to where you can sell. I
just realized something, another one. See, you're making me think here. Elon did say, right, that he goes that the new affordable vehicles are coming and it's going to be around under 30,000 if you include the incentives.
Yeah.
So which means that, to me, it's very unlikely at this point then, if that's the case, that it was the Cybercab with steering wheel. Because a Cybercab with steering wheel could be $15,000. It was cost so low, that's just, you don't just take that and add to it and have a $30,000 car. Maybe if he said $25,000 car, I would go, okay, maybe it is a Cybercab. But if it's $30,000, that means they just took an existing car and reduced it. Okay, I don't know. This is fun. Yeah. The steer by wire is another thing that people were saying. Like they go, because you have steer by wire in the Cybercab, very easy to just put a steering wheel in it. You didn't, that was why they did that.
That was another comment that Lars made in his Franz interview. He said that even without steer by wire necessarily, there's enough capability within, especially because they already do brake by wire, but within their electronic steering rack, that they don't necessarily have to have steer by wire in order to remove a steering wheel from an existing 3Y and be able to operate it, independently via FSD. So I don't think that's a game changer on that specific point. But yeah, I tend to agree with you. Like you said, that all the indications at this point, from what I stand, look like stripped down 3s and Ys. And whatever it is, like we're getting so close, we're going to find out, we're going to know, some people are going to be right, some people are going to be wrong. And it's going to be fun to actually get some clarity and some certainty here.
Another small little thing. Do you notice that the new Model Y has this feature where you press a button and if you want to have trunk space, the rear seats just automatically fold and then the front seats move forward. So I can imagine a scenario where you have a Model Y without rear seats and it's just massive trunk space for deliveries, 2 people.
Oh, yeah.
It's a 2-person car, like huge space, like massive space, much more than the Cybercab. And yet you still have your back. The reason why they want the back to have as much space is to put all these, your luggage and all that, but also for deliveries. Like they plan to use these cars at night for deliveries. But a Model Y without the rear seats, and it's just going to be such a massive cavernous experience,
One last cost saving thing that I mentioned earlier, but I just want to reinforce is, through the weight savings that they'll achieve if they do the plastic body panels and decontenting the stripped down 3 and Y will allow them to achieve similar range to the standard range Model 3 and Y with a smaller battery pack. And so, like I said, double down also on doing a smaller LFP battery pack that makes the vehicle also lighter and cheaper overall. I can clearly see a path to the type of cogs that they need to sell that vehicle under $30,000 after incentive, so under 37.5. And I think that car definitely is a significant step forward in growing the TAM and the overall demand for the existing fleet. And like I said, helping us to ramp the supply chains from where they are today to where we want them to be so that we can sell the number of Cybercabs that we're going to need to sell as FSD really starts to come home.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it. I think that now that we know that the Model Y transition has happened, I think we're hearing now that new Model Ys are produced and delivered in all the factories. That lets them start to work on it. I don't think they're going to retool the production lines. That's another reason why you think that maybe the existing 3s and Ys and existing Y, production line, they're producing the old Model Y and the new Model Y. Now they create the old Model Y, but stripped down. It's like an easy transition. Give them that chance to do that by June, May or June. That's when we're going to start seeing these vehicles. All right, or it could be the compact car because we're seeing hiring of that, but I still don't think so. I think that that's purposely built for Robotaxi and not for sale. And there's so many reasons you would just,
I think we're always going to hear a strong argument on why it's going to be the cyber car with the steering wheel and pedals, just because so many Tesla enthusiasts want that car to exist. That doesn't necessarily mean that Tesla will agree that that is the car that makes the most sense for them to make, but there's going to be a lot of demand for it. And that desire and demand from the customer base is going to reinforce these arguments on why that's what we're going to see, regardless of whether or not it is.
Thank you so much, Hans. Follow him on his YouTube channel, Hans C. Nelson. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.